Driving through a relentless snowstorm for 9 hours wasn't just a test of my endurance. It was supposed to be the ultimate proof of love. I had planned every detail meticulously. The cake from her favorite bakery, the dress she'd been eyeing for weeks tucked into my bag, and a reservation at that fancy restaurant she always talked about but never suggested we could afford. But when I arrived at Mia's house, soaked from ankle-deep snow and shivering from more than just the cold, I wasn't greeted with joy. I stumbled upon betrayal. The front door was unlocked, and their laughter hit me before I even stepped inside. It wasn't the warm kind of laughter shared between sisters reminiscing over old memories. It was sharp, cutting, and laced with contempt. My name floated into the air like a dagger. Abigail mid-sentence, saying, "God, I hope he crashes. I could use the insurance." The words froze me in place. Then came Mia's reply, casual as if discussing the weather, or at least a few months of silence. They laughed again, their voices echoing in my ears like a cruel soundtrack to the unraveling of everything I thought I knew. I stood there, invisible in the entryway, clutching the cake box so tightly my knuckles turned white. My mind raced, trying to reconcile the woman I married with the one laughing at the thought of my death. Was this some twisted joke? A slip of the tongue fueled by too much wine? Or was it something deeper? A festering resentment I hadn't seen until now. Each second felt like an eternity, the weight of her words pressing down on me. I wanted to storm in, confront them, demand answers. But instead, I did the hardest thing I've ever done. Nothing. Silently, I walked into the kitchen, placed the cake on the counter, and turned around without a word. As I trudged back through the snow to my car, the world seemed colder, darker. Every step felt heavier, as if the ground itself was conspiring against me. When I finally sat behind the wheel, hands trembling on the steering wheel, I realized the storm outside wasn't nearly as devastating as the one brewing inside me. The day after I heard Abigail's words, the storm outside felt like a reflection of the chaos brewing inside me. I drove to Theodore's house in silence, replaying her laughter over and over in my head. The betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was starting to feel financial too. That's when I decided to dig deeper into our accounts, something I'd avoided for years because I trusted her. How could I have been so blind? What I found made my blood run cold. Abigail had been spending $17,800 a month for an entire year. $17,000. On what? Designer bags, spa memberships, and vacations she never told me about. Every withdrawal felt like another slap across the face. But it got worse. She opened a store credit card without telling me, a $3,000 balance sitting there like a ticking time bomb. And then there were the cash withdrawals, $300 here, $500 there, totaling over $12,000 in unaccounted for cash. No receipts, no explanations, just empty spaces where our shared future should have been. But the real gut punch came when I discovered the mortgage documents. Our home, the one we bought together, the one I thought symbolized stability, was mortgaged. Mortgaged. For a loan of $50,000 that I didn't even know existed. The bank statements confirmed it. Abigail had taken out the loan 6 months ago, right around the time she started hanging out with Mia and her new friends. Suddenly, her comments about needing to upgrade our lifestyle made sense. It wasn't ambition, it was greed. She wasn't planning a future with me. She was leveraging ours against us. I sat at Theodore's kitchen table, staring at the spreadsheet Milton, my financial advisor, had prepared. Each number felt like a brick wall closing in on me. How could someone who laughed at the thought of my death also gamble with everything we owned? Was this why she wanted me gone? For the insurance money or to cover her debts? My mind raced with possibilities, each more devastating than the last. I couldn't breathe. I called Milton immediately, my voice shaking as I asked him how bad this could get. He stayed calm but firm. "Noah, you need to protect yourself legally before this spirals further." That night, I lay awake thinking about all the signs I'd ignored. The sudden obsession with luxury brands, the way she dismissed my concerns about budgeting, the whispered phone calls she always ended when I walked into the room. It wasn't just carelessness, it was calculated. And now, thanks to her actions, we were teetering on the edge of financial ruin. Worse still, I realized she might not care. If she could joke about my death for insurance money, what would stop her from letting the house go into foreclosure if it meant saving herself? By morning, I made a decision. I contacted the bank, froze our joint accounts, and redirected all mail to a P.O. box. Then I changed every password, canceled our shared subscriptions, and drafted a formal letter requesting financial separation. This wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. It was about survival. As I pressed send on the email to Abigail's lawyer, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief that I was finally taking control. Dread that this fight was far from over. The morning after I heard Abigail's laughter echo in my mind like a haunting melody, I woke up with a clarity that felt both liberating and suffocating. This wasn't just about her words anymore. It was about survival. I couldn't stay under the same roof as someone who'd wished me dead for insurance money, no matter how casually she'd said it. So, I made a plan, a cold, calculated one. At 9:30 a.m., knowing Abigail would be at work, I drove back to our house, though it no longer felt like mine. The air inside was heavy with memories I couldn't bear to face. I moved methodically through each room, packing everything that bore my identity: clothes, books, tools, even the small metal sculpture from that art fair she hated. Every item I removed felt like severing another thread binding me to her. But I didn't stop there. I disconnected the gaming setup she always mocked, unplugged the Wi-Fi router, and changed the password to "I hope he crashes 2023. Petty? Maybe. But every keystroke felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Before leaving, I turned down the thermostat to 62 degrees Fahrenheit, just low enough to remind her of my absence without making it unbearable. Then I took the light bulb out of the fridge, a final touch of silent defiance. By noon, Theodore's truck was loaded with my belongings, and I felt a strange mix of relief and emptiness. That afternoon, I called the insurance company. When they asked why I wanted to change the beneficiary on our $500,000 policy, I lied smoothly. "We're separating assets," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. They didn't question further. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of control. That evening, I signed a lease on a modest apartment downtown. It wasn't much, but it was mine, a blank slate. As I sat alone in the empty living room, scrolling through job listings that allowed remote work, I realized I wasn't just building a new home. I was rebuilding myself. 3 weeks into the separation, life felt like it was unraveling at both ends. I was sitting in my doctor's office, staring blankly at the floor as he explained that I needed surgery, immediate surgery. The words hit me like a freight train. Gallbladder removal wasn't exactly life-threatening, but the timing couldn't have been worse. My mind raced with questions. Who would take care of me during recovery? Would Abigail even care enough to ask? And if she did, could I trust her concern? That night, I called my parents, not because I wanted to, but because I had no choice. They'd never liked Abigail, always whispering about how she didn't deserve you, or how her spending habits were toxic. This time, though, their disapproval turned into something uglier. My mom practically screamed on the phone, "Noah, this is your wake-up call. Divorce her before she bankrupts you completely." Dad chimed in, his voice cold and unyielding. "You think she'll stick around now? Mark my words, she'll use this against you somehow." Their words cut deeper than I expected. Part of me wanted to defend Abigail, the woman I once loved, but another part couldn't ignore the truth in what they said. Still, I hesitated. Should I tell her? Would she come running back out of guilt, or would she see this as an opportunity to manipulate me further? The next morning, I drafted a text to Abigail. "I need to talk. It's important." But my finger hovered over the send button for hours. What if she laughed it off again, like some cruel joke? Or worse, what if she showed up just to make herself look good in front of others? Finally, I hit send, bracing myself for whatever response might come. Her reply arrived within minutes. "Are you okay?" Just 3 simple words, but they carried so much weight. For a moment, I let myself believe she still cared. Then reality slapped me awake. Was this genuine concern, or was she playing the role of the dutiful wife one last time? Either way, I knew I couldn't rely on her. Not when my own family doubted her intentions, not after everything we'd been through. 3 days after I moved out, I found myself at the grocery store, staring blankly at frozen pizzas while trying to remember which brand Theodore preferred. That's when Mia appeared, out of nowhere, like a storm cloud rolling in. She was holding a shopping basket, her face pale, as if she'd seen a ghost. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Before I could respond, She launched into an attack that felt more personal than any slap. "You're being cruel," she hissed, stepping closer until I could smell the faint scent of lavender on her scarf. "Abigail is devastated. You just left without a word, and now you won't even answer her calls. Do you have any idea what you're putting her through?" Her tone shifted from accusatory to manipulative in seconds. "People are starting to talk, Noah. They think you're emotionally abusive, disappearing like this, ignoring her. Is that the kind of man you want to be?" I clenched my fists inside my pockets, fighting back the urge to defend myself. What could I say? That I'd overheard her sister laughing about my potential death? That Abigail had joked about me crashing for insurance money? Somehow, those truths felt too raw, too private to share with someone like Mia, who thrived on drama. Instead, I stood there silently, letting her words wash over me like rain against a window, annoying but ultimately powerless. When she realized I wasn't going to respond, her expression hardened. "Fine," she snapped. "If you won't explain yourself, maybe everyone else should hear your side, or lack thereof." It was a threat, thinly veiled but clear. She'd twist the narrative, paint me as the villain. And sure enough, by the next day, our mutual friends were sliding into my DMs, asking what was going on. Some accused me of overreacting. Others hinted that Abigail was worried sick. But I didn't reply to any of them. Let them believe what they wanted. The truth was mine to carry, and mine alone. The coffee shop meeting was supposed to be about progress, about rebuilding bridges that had burned to ashes. But when Abigail slid the envelope across the table, her hands trembling slightly, I knew something heavier than reconciliation terms lay inside. She didn't say a word as I opened it, just stared at me with eyes so wide they seemed to swallow the room. Inside wasn't just her proposed agreement. It was a confession, written in shaky handwriting on a crumpled piece of paper. "I've been seeing someone," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jason, from work." My stomach dropped like an anchor hitting the ocean floor. This wasn't news. Hints of flirtation had lingered in her texts and late-night calls before, but hearing it aloud felt like being punched in the gut. "It's not what you think," she added quickly, though we both knew that was a lie. It was worse than I'd imagined. Months of stolen glances, lingering lunches, and secret messages culminating in something far beyond casual attraction. Then came the bombshell. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air like storm clouds, heavy and suffocating. Her next sentence shattered whatever remained of my composure. "But I don't know if it's yours or his." For a moment, time froze. My vision blurred, and the hum of conversation around us faded into white noise. How could this happen? More importantly, how could she sit there so calmly while my world imploded? Her tears came then, silent and desperate, streaming down her face like rain against a window. "I never meant for any of this to happen," she choked out. I thought maybe I could fix everything by myself." But now, her voice trailed off, leaving the unsaid hanging between us like a ghost. Fix it? Was she serious? Did she really believe she could erase months of betrayal with a few tearful apologies? I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but instead, I folded the letter neatly, tucked it back into the envelope, and stood up without a word. As I walked away, I realized this wasn't just about trust anymore. It was about survival. Could I ever look at her again without wondering whose child she carried? Without questioning every smile, every touch, every promise? It was Thursday afternoon when the doorbell rang, shattering the fragile calm I'd built over the past 3 weeks. Theodore answered, his voice low and cautious, before stepping back into the kitchen where I sat working remotely. "It's Abigail," he said, almost apologetically. My stomach clenched as if someone had tightened a vice around it. She was here, crying, demanding to see me, refusing to leave until she got answers. Part of me wanted to disappear, to slip out the back door like a shadow. But another part, the angrier, more stubborn part, refused to let her dictate this moment. I nodded at Theodore, who reluctantly opened the door wider. Abigail stumbled in, her hair disheveled, mascara streaked down her cheeks like war paint. Her eyes locked onto mine with a desperation that made my skin crawl. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "Why won't you talk to me? Let me explain." Each word felt like a hammer striking glass, cracking but not breaking through my resolve. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I pulled out my phone, opened the voice memo app, and pressed play. The the room filled with the sound of her laughter, the same cruel laugh I'd heard in Mia's kitchen. Then came her words, clear as day. God, I hope he crashes. I could use the insurance. Mia's follow-up echoed next, or at least a few months of silence. Their laughter played again, louder this time, reverberating off the walls. Abigail froze, her face draining of color so quickly I thought she might faint. When the recording ended, there was only silence. Her hands trembled as they covered her mouth, and tears streamed anew. But these weren't the manipulative sobs from before. They were raw, unfiltered panic. Noah, please, she whispered hoarsely. It wasn't what it sounded like. But I couldn't look at her without seeing the woman who'd laughed at the thought of my death. I told her coldly, I need time. Don't come here again. As she turned to leave, I realized something. No apology could erase what I'd heard. Trust isn't rebuilt with words, it's earned with actions. And right now, I needed space more than anything else. By the time I moved into my new apartment, Abigail's transformation was becoming impossible to ignore. It wasn't just the emails she sent, calmer, more reflective, but the subtle changes in her life that seeped through mutual friends and social media posts. She had started attending a women's accountability group, something Jill mentioned casually when we crossed paths at the grocery store. It's not about you, Jill said quickly, sensing my tension. But it's helping her grow. Grow? The word felt foreign when attached to Abigail, who once laughed at the thought of my death. Yet here she was, selling off designer bags on resale apps and hosting weekly meetings where women discussed financial independence and breaking toxic patterns. Meanwhile, I was building a life without her, a stark contrast to the man who drove 9 hours through a snowstorm for a cake and an apology. My one-bedroom apartment downtown smelled like fresh paint and possibility. Every morning, I ran along the river trail, dodging joggers and dog walkers, feeling muscles in my legs I hadn't used since college. At night, I cooked meals from recipes I'd bookmarked but never tried, discovering flavors I didn't know existed. For the first time in years, I felt present. Not Noah the husband or Noah the provider, but simply Noah. The hardest part wasn't the loneliness. It was realizing how much of myself I'd lost in our marriage. I remembered the way Abigail used to look at me, not with contempt, but admiration. Somewhere along the way, that gaze shifted, and I let it happen. But now, as I unpacked boxes labeled kitchen and books, I saw pieces of myself I thought were gone forever. A photo of me hiking with Theodore reminded me I used to love adventure. An old guitar case hinted at dreams I'd abandoned. Each discovery felt like reclaiming stolen ground. Then came the email from Abigail. I've applied for a part-time job at the art studio downtown. They're teaching classes on budgeting creativity. It's scary, but I think it's what I need. Scary? This was the woman who mocked financial literacy groups 6 months ago. Her words landed like a punch, forcing me to confront a truth I wasn't ready for. Maybe she wasn't the only one changing. Maybe this separation wasn't just about her. It was about us both finding ourselves again. The morning of the lawyers' meeting, I decided to stop by the house, not for Abigail, but to pick up some tools I'd forgotten in the garage. It wasn't supposed to be dramatic. I texted her first, and she replied with a quick, "Sure, I'll be here." But as I pulled into the driveway, something felt off. The front yard was filled with cars, 7 of them, parked haphazardly along the curb. My stomach tightened. What was going on? Curiosity got the better of me. I crept closer, peering through the living room window. Inside, Abigail sat at the center of a circle of women, each holding notebooks and pens. She was speaking passionately, gesturing with her hands, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. A whiteboard behind her read, "Breaking Toxic Patterns, Accountability Group." My jaw clenched. Was this another act? Or had she really turned our crumbling marriage into some kind of public spectacle? Before I could process it all, my phone buzzed, a notification from the mail app. An envelope marked urgent had arrived via courier. Inside was a 10-page handwritten letter and a USB drive labeled "For Noah Only." My hands trembled as I opened the letter. Page after page, Abigail poured out her soul, her regrets, her mistakes, her desperate attempts to understand why she'd said those words about the insurance money. She admitted to resenting me, to comparing us unfairly to others, and to letting envy consume her. But most haunting were her final lines. I don't know if I can ever forgive myself for what I've done to you, but I hope one day you'll believe that I'm trying." That night, I plugged in the USB drive. Her therapy sessions filled my ears, her shaky voice recounting moments of guilt, her therapist gently guiding her towards self-awareness. Each recording felt like a punch to the gut. Here was Abigail, raw and vulnerable, admitting fault after fault. Yet, despite the depth of her remorse, doubt lingered in my mind. How much of this was genuine? How much was damage control? As I stared at the glowing screen, I realized trust couldn't be rebuilt overnight. Maybe it never would. 3 months after that fateful night at Mia's house, we met again, this time in a quiet corner of a cafe neither of us had visited before. Abigail looked different. Her hair shorter, her clothes simpler, no trace of the flashy designer accessories she once cherished. She carried herself with an air of calm determination, like someone who'd spent those months wrestling with demons and was finally ready to face reality. When she slid a sealed envelope across the table, my breath caught in my throat. Inside were 2 proposals, one for reconciliation, one for divorce, each meticulously thought out, each revealing how much she'd changed. The terms shocked me, not because they were harsh, but because they were fair. For reconciliation, she suggested 6 months of couples therapy before considering moving back in together, full financial transparency, and regular check-ins about our relationship. For divorce, she offered a clean break, buying out my share of the house at market value, no alimony, minimal legal involvement. It was as if she'd stripped away every layer of pretense and laid bare what she truly wanted. Not control, not revenge, but clarity. As I read through the document, my mind raced with memories. The laughter in Mia's kitchen, the recording that shattered my trust, the weeks of silence where every unanswered text felt like another brick in the wall between us. Yet here she was, offering me a choice without manipulation, without guilt-tripping. I told her I needed more time. She nodded, her eyes glistening but steady. "Take all the time you need," she said softly. That evening, alone in my apartment, I bought the same cake from the bakery, the one I'd left on Mia's counter 90 days ago. I placed it on my new kitchen counter, took a photo, and sent it to Abigail. Then I sat on my second-hand couch, cutting a slice and eating it slowly. The sweetness lingered on my tongue, bittersweet like the journey I'd been through. Whether we reconciled or parted ways forever, I knew this. I wasn't the same man who drove 9 hours through a snowstorm to deliver a cake. I was stronger, wiser, and capable of making decisions from a place of strength, not fear.